Welcome to Proven and Probable, where we focus on metals, mining, and more. I'm your host, Maurice Jackson. Today's show, we will focus on physical gold and silver. Joining us today is Bill Murphy of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, also known as GATA. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thanks for having me, Maurice. Good to be here.
Mr. Murphy, for first-time listeners, can you please share who is the Gold Antitrust Action Committee?
Well, we were formed in 1999, January, by myself and my colleague Chris Powell, who's the editor of a daily newspaper in Connecticut, to expose the manipulation of the gold and silver markets and try to end it if we could. And we found out that this Gold Cartel, which we initially thought was a bunch of bullion banks, was much bigger than that. It included the Treasury, the Fed, the Bank for International Settlements, other central banks, Exchange Stabilization Fund, and so on. And we've been taking on this task every year since then, and the evidence is overwhelming of what they're doing. And of course, you can see it in the daily action, and it's a big, big deal. And eventually, when they do get exposed, it'll be the biggest financial scandal in U.S. market history, in my opinion.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Bill, when it comes to gold and silver, precious metals advocates, they look to GATA for answers. Now, before we begin, let's put some things into context. Many of our listeners own gold and silver because the thesis of currency creation, which is actually inflation, suggests that the currency will continue to devalue and my metals will either preserve my standard of living or significantly increase my purchasing power, which leads to the million-dollar question: why is my thesis not coming to fruition? Now, for our listeners, your thesis, I would suggest, is fervently intact. But to take the narrative further, we have to expand the context. GATA may have some insight regarding this matter. Beginning with gold, Bill, who is the Gold Cartel?
Well, as I said, I tried to gave my opinion earlier who it was, and the bullion banks and the U.S. government, basically. And you're absolutely correct. Gold is not working, and that's because of the Gold Cartel. James Turk of Gold Money said the gold price, if it kept up with inflation, today would be $3,300 if nothing else was involved. And all the other things we've seen in recent years, zero interest rates, the deficit going crazy, budget deficits in the United States. All these things are extraordinarily bullish, but it doesn't work. Nothing works. The only thing that matters, in terms of my opinion, in the gold and silver prices coming up, is that the Gold Cartel has to blow up. Otherwise, we'll never go up in our lifetime, and they've made the whole thing dysfunctional. No, I think that timing is coming very close in the beginning of the end for the bad guys, at least enough so that they're going to have to retreat extraordinarily so, and that's because the gold and silver prices are artificially too low. And what your listeners and followers are going to do is reap the benefit of this thing exploding at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future. I mean, it's coming, and it's going to be something to behold, especially in silver.
Well, I think as a value proposition that this presents for all of us that own precious metals, if you take the bad with the good, there is some good in this, which this is an opportunity for us to deploy more capital towards owning more physical gold and silver, because the value proposition is ridiculous. As you just alluded to, these prices are artificially suppressed, and those that are prudent and good stewards of capital know this is the time to purchase some precious metals. Now, as a steward of precious metals, why is it important to know their identity, this Gold Cartel, and equally important, their actions?
Because without it, people just are giving up. The sentiment right now in gold is the worst in 20 years. I was just supposed to speak at a symposium in Belgium. Peter Schiff was the featured speaker last year. They just canceled it. There is no interest. Of course, there's interest in Asia and in the East, but not in the West. The gold open interest and the COMEX just collapsed faster than perhaps any time in history. It's only some 25,000 contracts are multi-year lows. The speculators have been getting out like crazy. And at the same time, they're pouring into silver, which is only, 12,000 contracts from all-time highs, and the price hasn't done anything. It's a dichotomy that is historic, and I think setting up something in the not too distant future, which is going to be quite remarkable on the upside.
Well, again, we're all looking for this promised day because it's unfortunate that justice has not been served. I know GATA has been on the forefront to bringing attention and enlightenment to not just investors, but to citizens as a whole, because we have to keep in mind the government is for the people and by the people, and they're not a separate entity in and of themselves, that they're above the people. So thank you again for that. Is the Gold Cartel a quasi-government entity like the Federal Reserve?
Yes, in the sense that they have the freedom and right to do whatever they want to do. And the laws are very subtle and hidden, but as my colleague Chris Powell has exposed, they have the right to do anything they want. And that's the reason that investigations into like the silver market on JP Morgan, the CFTC came up with nothing. They're finding wrongdoings everywhere. They find the bullion banks for rigging markets and currencies and the oil market and everything you can think of. I mean, JP Morgan has paid $33 billion in fines over the past year, but they never find wrongdoing in the gold and silver markets when it's the most obvious rigging of all. And that's because the government's behind it and are in cahoots with the bullion banks and have operated with them. And that's what has made this task so difficult to expose, because the press, and we have no free press, they won't even write about it. They won't even mention GATA's name. We're not allowed to be mentioned. I mean, this is America, right? No. So, but I think they're going to the tipping point I mentioned because of the physical supply issues. They're running out of enough physical supply to keep the price down, and that's what's going to cause them to blow up. While the demand, as I said, is lousy here now, it still is surging in different parts of the world.
And speaking of the physical demand, if I'm not mistaken, the U.S. Treasury is not allowed to use gold and or silver from another country. Is that correct?
Well,
in publishing our coins?
I'm not sure about that. I know that the United States is not allowed to sell gold. We got rid of all our silver, as far as I know, without an act of Congress. But what we can do is swap gold with other countries and sell their gold to keep the price down.
When you mentioned the Gold Cartel as a quasi-government entity, it reminds me of the Plunge Protection Team, also known as the Working Group on Financial Markets. It's just really unfortunate that it's not a free market the way it should be. Speaking of the Federal Reserve, does the Gold Cartel have a relationship? Let's discuss that relationship a little bit further, if I may say, with the Federal Reserve. Tie that in, the Gold Cartel with the Federal Reserve, because there is a price suppression here.
Well, the Fed and the Treasury, the ones that have the gold, are supposed to have the gold and deal with it. And you've got JP Morgan is the Fed's bank. Everyone knows that, and they're the major short in the silver market. It made lives miserable for silver owners all these past years. And
now,
that's what they do.
Now, Bill, do you subscribe to the thesis that, because we hear conflicting reports. So on one side, I hear the largest holder of gold is the Federal Reserve. Then I hear that the Federal Reserve has no gold. China has all the gold. And then I hear a third point, which is that the Federal Reserve, through JP Morgan, has the physical gold, but the title or ownership of that is with the U.S. Treasury. Where do you stand on this?
Well, it's mysterious in the sense of, as my colleague Chris Powell says, we would rather disclose our nuclear secrets than our gold secrets. Nobody knows what's really going on there because there hasn't been an audit since 1955. So it's all conjecture, where it is, who owns it, how much do we really have. It's ludicrous that you can't have an audit about our gold reserves. What hasn't been audited since 1955? So it's a big secret. If we're right, the United States doesn't have anywhere near the 8,135 tons of gold we say we have, and it's eventually going to lead to something dramatic.
Now, Bill, for the listener, what is a source that they can use to verify these comments?
Well, the easiest way to do it, not my own website, but my colleague Chris Powell has documented all the evidence that we have over many, many years at www.gata.org. And in my commentary, I outline, every day the price action, and you can see them all day. It's the most obvious thing in the world. And our colleague James McShirley, a lumber executive who's puts this stuff out in my website, and it shows how the price goes up 1%, and they stop it to the tick, and he can circle that price in advance, and he knows exactly what they're going to do. It's the most obvious thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'm 71 years old, and it's there for everyone to see if they want to take the time to do it. And most people don't, understandably, but that's what I do, and I know what I'm talking about.
Yes, you do. You are a very trusted source, and you've earned that reputation, sir. Switching gears, let's discuss silver. What has you so optimistic about silver?
Well, silver is the gold cartel's kryptonite. We don't know where they've come up with the supply these past years to keep it down, but they have. And I think that we've finally reached the tipping point in which they're just going to blow up. And it'll be a move like never seen before in American history and markets. And I think that will happen once we start to happen, once we take out 21. And that's because they've gone beyond the pale and they've overstepped their bounds to keep the precious metals down at such low prices. And right at the moment, there are a group of speculators that think that's going to happen because the open interest on the COMEX, which is the number of buyers and sellers, is close to all-time highs. Now, if the bad guys, as I would call them, the J.P. Morgan and their cohorts, can't come up with the physical silver to keep these prices at artificial levels, they'll lose control, and they won't be able to make deliveries to people who want the silver in the future. And that's why the price will go bonkers if it takes out 21. I mean, silver was at $50 in 1980. And then, what hasn't made new highs, no matter what the reason, in 37 years? So it's ridiculous. It's the most undervalued asset in the world. And I think once they lose control, all the stuff that I'm talking about here will come to fruition. And once we take out 50, we head to 100, and then who knows? I mean, $100 is what Eric Sprott, who I follow very closely, who's a genius in Canada, thinks is coming, and it could go much higher than that. But now's the time to be all over silver, because the downside is Mickey Mouse and the upside is historic.
You made a very good point there. I can't think of any capital or consumer good, really, that is 60% below its 1980 high today. You'll be very hard-pressed, and still has value, that is, as well, today. And silver has more value today than it did in 1980. We use it in virtually every product behind petroleum products. So it has a very prudent and dominant position in the market. So between gold and silver, Bill, are you saying that silver is your form of stewardship?
Well,
preference?
They're both good, of course. But my preference is silver because I think that the gold-silver ratio, now about 68-50, 70, could go down probably to 20. So silver is going to make, because of what they have done and gone through all their supplies, there's still gold supply. It's a question about the price. But silver, we're talking about maybe no supply. So it's an opportunity of a lifetime, in my opinion.
It truly is, and we share mutual thoughts on that. Bill, now in reference to silver, before we leave that though, what is your favorite, because everyone wants to respect your opinion, do you like the 100-ounce bars, you like the silver eagles, you like rounds or junk silver? What's your preference?
Well, everybody's got their own choice, and I think it's whatever you're comfortable with and where you want to store it and what you want to do. And I leave that up to my brother who works in the gold silver coin business in Arizona, and I'll let him take care of that for me.
Understood. Well, last question for you, Bill. What did I forget to ask?
Oh, you've had great questions, Maurice, and I really appreciate it. And I think in addition to owning physical silver, some of these share prices are going to go nuts. I mean, First Majestic, I think, is unique, and Keith Neumeyer, their CEO, is one of the few people that's acknowledged the manipulation of the silver market. Why he's the only guy, I don't know, but he gets it. And I know Keith when I lived up in Vancouver. And I think that, and these share prices, by the way, I've been predicting silver going to zero. I've never seen them act worse lately, while the silver price has been creeping up here. And I think that's because of the lack of interest in the investment sector. And if you're a contrarian, it's setting up one of the most unusual situations I've seen in 40 years.
Yeah, as you referenced the mining stocks here, just look at last year. Gold moved up, what, 20, 30%? And any company with the nomenclature gold saw returns, 100% to 1,000% and more. So just imagine the price movement we will have with a company such as First Majestic. And speaking of Keith Neumeyer, we will be interviewing him in the very near future. So thank you for bringing his name up.
Well, tell him I said hello.
I will definitely do that. Oh, and by the way, in speaking of the mining stocks, do you have again, and I know it's personal, but is there a ratio that you like of physical versus the mining?
Well, being a former broker myself, I'm more in tune with the silver shares, but having a decent amount of both obviously is terrific, and it depends upon personal taste and risks that you have in other markets and that sort of thing. So it's really a personal matter, in my opinion.
All right, thank you for that. Now, Bill, if someone wants to learn more about GATA, please share the contact details.
Well, www.gata.org. What my colleague Chris Powell does, who's now in Singapore and going to Hong Kong to fight the good fight for GATA. You can sign up there for, you've got a free service. And then my website, themetropolecafe.com. People can sign up for a 2-week free trial and see if it's of value.
All right, and last but not least, please visit our website, www.provenandprobable.com. Through Miles Franklin Precious Metals Investments, we offer gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, offshore storage, precious metals IRAs, and safe deposit boxes, which are fully insured and secured by Brinks. The website again is www.provenandprobable.com. You may reach us at contact@provenandprobable.com. Bill Murphy of GATA, thank you for joining us today on Proven and Probable.
Thank you, Maurice.
All the best, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Proven and Probable. Remember to like and subscribe for more conversations with the most respected names in the natural resource space. Check out our website at www.provenandprobable.com. The information presented on Proven and Probable is provided for educational and informational purposes only, without any express or implied warranty of any kind, including warranties of accuracy, completeness, or fitness for any particular purpose. The information is not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice, or any other advice. You should not make any financial, investment, or trading decision based on any of the information presented without first undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional broker or competent financial advisor.